What happens when a Hollywood legend confronts a talk show panel who refuses to show respect? In just 39 seconds, a casual conversation turned into an unforgettable showdown that ended with one of cinema's most iconic figures walking off the View set, leaving the host speechless and the audience in absolute shock. The studio lights were bright as always. The audience settled into their seats, excited for another episode. Clint Eastwood, the legendary actor and director, sat across from the panel. Whoopi Goldberg was in the center, flanked by Joy Behar, Sunny Hostin, Sarah Haynes, and Alyssa Farah Griffin. The conversation started normally enough. They discussed his career, his films, the usual topics you would expect. But something was different today. There was a tension in the air that nobody could quite put their finger on. The questions seemed pointed, almost accusatory. Whoopi started things off with what seemed like a simple question about his latest project, but the way she asked it felt loaded. Clint answered politely, as he always does. He spoke about the film, about the process, about working with the cast. His voice was calm, measured, professional, but you could tell he noticed the edge in her voice. The other panelists jumped in occasionally, adding their own comments, but Whoopi dominated the conversation. Then Joy Behar leaned forward and said something about his political views. Her tone was sharp, almost mocking. She said, "You have some pretty strong opinions about things, don't you?" It was not really a question. It was more like an accusation disguised as small talk. Clint kept his composure. He said, "I believe everyone has the right to their own opinions. That is what makes this country great." The audience clapped at that. Some of them were clearly on his side. But Whoopi was not having it. She waved her hand dismissively and said, "But sometimes opinions can be harmful, Clint. Sometimes people need to be held accountable for what they say." Her voice had that quality to it, the one that says she is the arbiter of what is right and wrong. Clint looked at her for a moment. His expression did not change much, but you could see something shift in his eyes. He said, "Accountable to who? To you? Since when did you become the judge of what people are allowed to think?" The studio went quiet. The audience was not sure if they should gasp or applaud. Whoopi sat back in her chair, clearly not expecting that kind of pushback. She laughed, but it was one of those laughs that was meant to hide discomfort. She said, "I am not trying to judge anyone. I am just saying that with a platform comes responsibility." Clint nodded slowly, like he was considering her words. Then he said, "Responsibility to what? To say what you want me to say? To think what you want me to think? That is not how freedom works." His voice was still calm, but there was steel in it now. He was not backing down. Sunny Hostin decided to jump in at that point. She said, "Clint, I think what Whoopi is trying to say is that your views have consequences. They affect people. And when you have influence, you need to be aware of that." She tried to sound reasonable, diplomatic even, but it came across as condescending. Clint turned to her and said, "My views have consequences, so do yours, so does everyone's. That is the point. We all have the right to speak our minds without being attacked for it." He was getting more animated now, though still controlled. You could tell he was someone who had been through real challenges, real conflicts, and this was just another day for him. Sarah Haynes tried to lighten the mood. She said, "Maybe we can all agree to disagree on this one?" She was smiling, trying to smooth things over, but it was too late for that. The lines had been drawn. Whoopi cut her off. "No, Sarah, I think this is important. Clint, you come on here, you sit at this table, and you expect us to just nod and smile while you say whatever you want. But this is our show. This is our space. And if we think something you say is wrong, we're going to call it out." That was the moment. That was when everything changed. Clint looked at her, really looked at her, and you could see he had made a decision. He said, "Your show? Your space? I thought this was supposed to be a conversation. I thought we were here to talk like adults. But it seems like you just want to lecture me." Whoopi leaned forward, her voice getting louder. "We are not lecturing you. We are trying to have a discussion, but you are being defensive." She was getting worked up now, her hands moving as she spoke. Clint shook his head. "No, Whoopi. A discussion involves listening to each other. You are not listening. You are just waiting for your turn to attack." He was right. Anyone watching could see it. The panel was not interested in hearing what he had to say. They just wanted to make him look bad. Joy jumped back in. "Oh, come on, Clint. You know how this works. You have been in the public eye long enough. If you say something controversial, people are going to respond." She was smirking, like she thought she had made a great point. Clint turned to her. "Controversial according to who? You? Your audience? What is controversial to one person is common sense to another. That is the nature of opinions. But you all seem to think your opinions are facts, and everyone else is just wrong. Alyssa Farah Griffin, who had been quiet up until now, finally spoke up. I think we all need to take a breath here. This is getting heated. She was trying to be the voice of reason, but even she could not hide the fact that the panel had been attacking him from the start. Whoopi waved her off. No, Alyssa. I want to hear what Clint has to say. Because honestly, I'm starting to think he does not respect what we do here. Her voice was dripping with entitlement. It was clear she thought the show was her kingdom, and anyone who disagreed with her was an enemy. Clint stood up. The sudden movement caught everyone off guard. The camera zoomed in on him. The audience went completely silent. He looked down at Whoopi and said, "You want to know if I respect what you do here? Honestly, no, I do not. Because what you do here is not conversation, it is ambush. You invite people on, you pretend to be interested in what they have to say, and then you attack them for not agreeing with you." Whoopi's mouth dropped open. Joy looked stunned. Sonny tried to interrupt, but Clint kept going. I have been around a long time. I have seen a lot, and I can tell you, this right here, this is not honest. This is not fair. This is just a group of people who think they are better than everyone else, sitting around patting themselves on the back for being so enlightened. The audience was in shock. Some people started to clap. Others looked uncomfortable. The panel did not know what to do. Whoopi finally found her voice. Clint, you do not get to come on here and insult us like that. This is unacceptable. Her face was red. She was furious. Clint looked at her calmly. Unacceptable? You just spent the last 10 minutes insulting me, but I guess it is only okay when you do it, right? He paused, letting that sink in. Then he said, I came here thinking we could have a real conversation, but clearly I was wrong, so I am done. Whoopi stood up too. You cannot just leave. We are in the middle of a segment. She sounded desperate now, like she was losing control of the situation. Clint smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. Watch me. And with that, he unclipped his microphone, set it on the table, and started walking off the set. The cameras followed him. The audience did not know whether to cheer or stay quiet. Some of them clapped loudly. Others just watched in disbelief. Whoopi called after him. Clint, come back. We can talk about this. But he did not even turn around. He just kept walking, his head held high, his shoulders back. He looked like a man who had stood his ground and was not going to apologize for it. Joy tried to laugh it off. Well, that was unexpected, but her voice was shaky. Sonny looked at Whoopi, who was still standing there, clearly trying to figure out what to do next. Sarah just stared at her hands. Alyssa was the only one who seemed somewhat composed, but even she looked rattled. The producers scrambled to cut to commercial. The audience was buzzing with excitement and confusion. What had just happened? Did Clint Eastwood really just walk off The View? And more importantly, why? For those watching at home, it was clear. Clint had come on the show expecting a conversation. He expected to be treated with respect, like any guest should be, but instead, he was met with hostility and condescension. The panel, led by Whoopi, had decided before he even sat down that they were going to challenge him, corner him, make him look bad. But Clint Eastwood is not someone who backs down from a fight. He has faced down outlaws in westerns, fought in wars on screen, directed some of the most powerful films in cinema history. A talk show panel was not going to intimidate him, and when he realized that they were not interested in hearing what he had to say, he did the only thing that made sense. He left. Back on the set, the panel tried to regroup. Whoopi sat back down, still looking flustered. Joy was making jokes, trying to lighten the mood, but no one was laughing. Sonny was shaking her head, clearly upset that the interview had gone so wrong. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear. Alyssa was the only one who seemed to understand that they had gone too far. When they came back from commercial, Whoopi tried to address what had happened. She said, well, that was certainly something. Clint decided to leave. We were just trying to have a conversation. But her words rang hollow. Anyone who had been watching knew that was not true. They had not been trying to have a conversation. They had been trying to put him in his place. Joy chimed in. You know, sometimes people just cannot handle being challenged. It was a cheap shot, and everyone knew it. Clint had handled being challenged just fine. What he could not handle was being disrespected. Sonny tried to defend the panel. We ask tough questions here. That is what we do. If people do not like it, maybe they should not come on the show. But that statement only made things worse. It confirmed what everyone was thinking. The View was not interested in dialogue. They were interested in control. Sarah, to her credit, looked uncomfortable with the whole thing. She said quietly, "Maybe we could have handled that better." It was a small admission, but it was something. At least one person on the panel was willing to acknowledge that they had crossed a line. Alyssa nodded in agreement. "Yeah, I think we all got a little heated. It happens, but I respect Clint for standing up for himself." She was the only one who said anything remotely fair about him. The rest of the panel just wanted to move on and pretend like nothing had happened. But the damage was done. The moment was out there. People were talking about it online immediately. Videos of the walkout started spreading. The comments were overwhelmingly in support of Clint. People were tired of seeing guests treated poorly on talk shows. They were tired of the lecturing, the moral grandstanding, the sense of superiority that so many hosts seemed to have. Clint had given voice to something that a lot of people were feeling. He had shown that it was okay to stand up for yourself, to walk away from a situation that was not fair or honest. He had reminded everyone that respect is a two-way street. You cannot demand it if you are not willing to give it. For Whoopi and the rest of the panel, the walkout was a wake-up call, or at least it should have been. It showed them that their approach was not working, that people were not as willing to accept their behavior as they thought. But whether they would actually learn from it remained to be seen. The whole incident lasted maybe 15 minutes from start to finish. But in those 15 minutes, something important happened. A man who had spent his entire life earning respect stood up and demanded it. He refused to be talked down to. He refused to play along with the charade. And in doing so, he became a hero to millions of people who were tired of the same old games. The studio emptied out not long after. The audience left, still buzzing with excitement over what they had just witnessed. The panel stayed behind for a bit, probably trying to figure out how to spin the story. But no amount of spin could change what had happened. Clint Eastwood had walked off The View, and he had done it with his dignity intact. Backstage, Clint did not say much. He thanked the crew for their work, collected his things, and left the building. He did not give any interviews about what had happened. He did not go on social media to defend himself. He did not need to. His actions had spoken for him. That is the thing about Clint Eastwood. He has always been a man of action, not words. When he feels something is wrong, he does not sit around complaining about it. He takes action. And on that day, his action was to walk away from a situation that had become toxic and disrespectful. The confrontation between Clint and Whoopi was not just about two people disagreeing. It was about something much bigger. It was about the culture of modern talk shows, where guests are often treated more like targets than people. It was about the arrogance of hosts who think they have the right to dictate what others should think and say. And it was about the courage it takes to stand up and say enough is enough. When Clint walked off that set, he was not just walking away from The View. He was walking away from the idea that he had to sit there and take it. He was rejecting the notion that his views were somehow less valid than theirs. He was standing up for the principle that everyone deserves respect, no matter what their opinions are. And that is why people responded so strongly to what he did. Because deep down, most people know what it is like to be talked down to. They know what it is like to be dismissed or ridiculed for their beliefs. And when they saw Clint stand up for himself, they saw a reflection of their own frustrations and their own desire to be heard. The whole thing was a reminder that respect is not something that should be conditional. It should not depend on whether someone agrees with you or not. It should be a basic part of how we treat each other. And when that respect is absent, sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. The heated clash that day on The View was not planned. It was not scripted. It was a real moment between real people, and that is what made it so powerful. It showed that even in a world of carefully crafted media appearances, there is still room for genuine emotion and genuine conflict. And sometimes, that conflict can be exactly what is needed to expose the truth. Looking back at the beginning of the segment, the warning signs were all there. From the moment Clint sat down, there was a certain energy in the room. The panel exchanged glances with each other. Their body language was closed off, defensive even. They were not sitting there as interviewers. They were sitting there as prosecutors. The first few minutes were deceptively calm. Whoopi asked about his childhood, his early days in Hollywood. Clint answered with stories he had told 1,000 times before. The audience laughed at the right moments. Everything seemed fine on the surface. But underneath, the tension was building. It was when they started talking about his career choices that things began to shift. Joy asked why he chose certain roles over others. The question itself was innocent enough, but the way she asked it suggested there was a right answer and a wrong answer. Clint gave his honest response. He talked about following his instincts, about taking risks, about not being afraid to go against the grain. Sonny jumped in immediately. But do you ever think about the message those roles send? Do you ever consider how they might influence people? Her tone was sharp, accusatory. It was clear she thought his answer was wrong. Clint paused before answering. He was choosing his words carefully. He said, "I think people are smart enough to know the difference between a movie and real life. I trust the audience. Maybe you should too." It was a subtle jab, but it hit its mark. Sonny sat back, her expression hardening. She did not like being challenged. None of them did. Sarah tried to change the subject, asking about his directing process. But before Clint could fully answer, Whoopi cut back in. She wanted to talk about politics again. She wanted to pin him down on his views, to make him defend himself. It was like watching a lion circling its prey. Clint refused to take the bait at first. He kept his answers measured and calm, but you could see the frustration building. Every time he tried to explain his perspective, someone would interrupt him. Every time he made a point, someone would twist his words. It was exhausting just to watch. The audience could feel it too. Some of them were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Others were nodding along with Clint, clearly sympathizing with his position. The room was divided, and the divide was growing with every passing minute. Then came the moment that really set things off. Joy made a comment about how some people refuse to evolve with the times. She said it casually, like she was just making an observation, but everyone knew who she was talking about. She was talking about Clint. She was calling him outdated, stuck in the past, irrelevant. Clint looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Evolve? You mean conform? Because that is what you are really asking for. You want everyone to think the same way you do. And if they do not, you call them outdated, or worse." The words hung in the air. Joy tried to laugh it off, but the damage was done. Whoopi leaned forward aggressively. "That is not fair, Clint. We are not asking you to conform. We are asking you to think about the impact of your words and your work." But her voice betrayed her. She was defensive now. She had not expected him to push back this hard. Clint shook his head. "I have thought about it. For decades. I have thought about it more than you can imagine. But thinking about something does not mean I have to agree with you. It does not mean I have to change my mind just because you think I should." Alyssa tried to step in. "I think what we are all trying to say, Clint, is that we live in a different world now. Things that were acceptable before might not be acceptable today." She was trying to sound diplomatic, but even her words carried the same underlying message: change or be left behind. Clint turned to her. "Acceptable to who? You keep saying we live in a different world, but who gets to decide what is acceptable? Who made you the authority?" It was a fair question, but it was also a dangerous one, because it challenged the very foundation of what the panel believed. The panel believed they were the authority. They believed they had the moral high ground. They believed that anyone who disagreed with them was simply wrong. And now, here was Clint Eastwood, a man with decades of experience and wisdom, telling them they were not as enlightened as they thought. That was when the argument really escalated. Voices were raised, fingers were pointed. The carefully maintained veneer of civility cracked wide open, and through it all, Clint remained remarkably calm. He was not yelling. He was not losing his temper. He was simply stating his position clearly and firmly. The contrast was striking. On one side, you had the panel, emotional and aggressive, talking over each other in their rush to condemn him. On the other side, you had Clint, composed and measured, speaking with the confidence of someone who knows exactly who he is and what he believes. When Whoopi made her comment about it being their show and their space, it was the final straw, because in that moment, she revealed what this had always been about. It was about power. It was about control. It was about making sure that anyone who stepped onto their stage played by their rules. But Clint Eastwood does not play by anyone's rules except his own. He never has. And he was not about to start now. Not for The View, not for Whoopi Goldberg, not for anyone. So he stood up. And in that simple act, he reclaimed his power. He showed that he was not going to be bullied or intimidated. His speech before walking off was perfect. It was everything that needed to be said. He called them out for their hypocrisy. He exposed their tactics. He laid bare the truth of what was happening. And he did it all without raising his voice or resorting to personal attacks. He simply told the truth. And the truth was damning. The truth was that The View was not interested in conversation. They were interested in conformity. They wanted guests who would nod along and agree with everything they said. They wanted validation, not dialogue. And when they did not get it, they turned hostile. As Clint walked off the set, every eye in the studio was on him. The cameras tracked his every step. The audience was completely silent, holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Would he turn back? Would he say something else? But no. He just kept walking, steady and sure. Behind him, the panel sat in stunned silence. They had not expected this. They thought they could push him around, that he would eventually cave and apologize or backtrack. But they had underestimated him. They had forgotten who they were dealing with. This was Clint Eastwood. He had faced down tougher opponents than them. The moment he disappeared backstage, chaos erupted. The producers were scrambling. The directors were shouting into their headsets. The crew looked at each other in disbelief. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Sure, there had been tense moments on the show, but nobody had ever just walked off like that. When they cut to commercial, the panel immediately started talking among themselves. You could see the panic in their faces. Whoopi was gesturing wildly. Joy was shaking her head. Sunny looked furious. Sarah looked like she wanted to cry. Alyssa was the only one who seemed to understand the gravity of what had just happened. The audience was talking too. Some people were saying how brave Clint was. Others were criticizing the panel for being too aggressive. A few were trying to defend Whoopi and the others, but even they seemed half-hearted about it. The general consensus was clear. The panel had gone too far. During the commercial break, a producer came out to talk to the panel. You could see him gesturing, probably trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. But what could they do? Clint was gone. He was not coming back. They were going to have to face the music. When they came back on air, Whoopi tried to play it cool, but you could see the strain in her face. She was not used to being challenged like this. She was used to being in control, to having the last word, but Clint had taken that away from her, and she did not know how to deal with it. Her explanation of what happened was pathetic. She tried to make it seem like Clint was being unreasonable, like he had overreacted, but anyone who had been watching knew better. The panel had attacked him from the start. They had questioned his integrity, his intelligence, his character. And when he defended himself, they acted like he was the problem. Joy's comment about people not being able to handle being challenged was particularly galling, because that was exactly what the panel could not handle. They could not handle being challenged. They could not handle someone disagreeing with them. They could not handle losing control of the narrative. Sunny's defense of their approach was even worse. She basically admitted that they were there to grill guests, not to have genuine conversations. She said it like it was a good thing, like it was their job to make people uncomfortable. But that is not what good interviewing is about. Good interviewing is about understanding, about learning, about connecting with your guest. The View had long since abandoned that approach. Somewhere along the way, they had decided that their job was to be activists, not journalists. They wanted to change minds, not open them. They wanted to preach, not explore. And that had turned their show into something toxic. That is what made Clint's walkout so significant. It was not just about one man standing up for himself. It was about pushing back against a culture that had become increasingly intolerant and self-righteous. It was about saying no to people who think they have all the answers and everyone else is just ignorant or evil. The rest of the show limped along awkwardly. The panel tried to move on to other topics, but the energy was gone. The audience was distracted. The hosts were distracted. Everyone was still thinking about what had just happened. It was like a bomb had gone off in the studio and they were all just walking through the wreckage. Meanwhile, Clint was long gone. He had left the building and was probably on his way home, not giving the incident another thought. Because that is who he is. He does not dwell on drama. He does not seek attention. He just does what he thinks is right and moves on. But the rest of the world was not ready to move on. Social media exploded with reactions. Some people were applauding Clint. Others were defending the panel. Arguments broke out in comment sections everywhere. Everyone had an opinion about what had happened and what it meant. In the days that followed, the story would only grow bigger. But that is not what this is about. This is about the moment itself. This is about what happened in that studio on that day. This is about a man who refused to be disrespected and a panel that learned, perhaps for the first time, that their authority was not absolute. The confrontation showed us something important. It showed us that standing up for yourself is not always easy, but it is always worth it. It showed us that you do not have to accept mistreatment, even from people who think they are better than you. It showed us that respect is earned, not demanded. And most importantly, It showed us that there are still people in this world who have the courage to walk away from situations that do not serve them. People who are willing to sacrifice comfort for integrity. People who understand that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate. That is what Clint Eastwood did on that day. He refused to participate in a farce. He refused to sit there and be lectured by people who thought they knew better. He refused to compromise his dignity for the sake of playing nice. And in doing so, he reminded all of us what real strength looks like.